What's up, everyone? We are back. I hope you had a nutritious, whole food-based lunch, giving you plenty of energy to focus on this excellent panel. What do you say?
Absolutely.
All right.
Right.
We have some good panelists here with us. We're going to be talking about a modern data strategy. And it is, in fact, a strategy. You have tactics, what particular tool to use, but you have a strategy above that, and that is what's worth spending your time on, how do you measure value, how do you align things, all these kinds of questions. So I have three very senior panelists with me, and I think we can kick it off by you introducing yourselves. Please, go ahead.
I'm Serge Gershkovich. I am the product success lead at SqlDBM, which is an online database modeling tool.
All right.
Okay, yeah. Hi, I'm Jonathan Sunderland. I'm at Initio. Given all the AI stuff, I should say I'm a human. And I'm a catalyst, so I love to get people being more effective in the things they do, reaction with data, with people, and generally driving great outcomes.
We'll have to discuss what it means to be human at some point in order to understand what you just said, but all right.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Neat. I'm the general manager of Alation. We provide data catalogs to underpin many a data strategy.
All right. Well, let's dive into the first set of questions here that we got from the audience. What are the latest trends in modern data strategy, and how can businesses incorporate them to stay ahead of the curve? There are a lot of words that have been thrown around here in the past couple of years. You know, we had a panel here last year, and words like agile and these kinds of things sort of get thrown around, but much like the word human, what I've been finding in the past year as I've been focusing more on moonshot projects is that people will use the word value, but when you ask them, how do you measure it or something like that, it turns out everybody was actually using the word in a different way. And so we can't get started with the project because they have to align themselves first internally and start discussing, wait, what do you actually mean? What are we measuring? We're measuring how much fun the customer is having, right? No. This is actually not about that. It's about our internal efficiency or something like that. So in terms of the trends that have been cropping up in the past half year when it comes to data strategy, what terms and concepts have been sort of leading the charge?
You mean the ones that are actually delivering value or the ones that everyone's talking about? Because those are really two separate things.
Good point. Let's make a distinction.
I think this morning, Cassie did a really good job of breaking down kind of the revolution that people are aware of and and what people are talking about. And it's really about productivity, if you're being productive, or are you just talking about we need to get in, 10 years ago, we need to do big data. Nobody knew what big data was. We need to do AI is what you hear today. And are you actually aligning what you're trying to do to the business before you define the technology that you're going to implement? So in many ways, that's what people are failing to do, and just by jumping on the bandwagon of, we hear this new buzzword, we need to make sure our data people are on it.
I feel like there are a lot of people writing that on LinkedIn, but there's a cheap way to do it and a sort of insightful way to do it. A lot of people write everything from, AI is nothing new, or language models are just parrots, or don't just use a tech for the sake of tech. It's not even about the tech, it's about the people, or something like that. What is the way to actually get started in the right way? I mean, do you understand what I'm trying to...
I think about agility from first principles, right? And ultimately, this is about being able to adapt to a change and changing circumstance, right? And the fundamental of that is actually having capacity. It's interesting, you're talking about weightlifting or exercise. Part of that is to give you capacity for some future state. And if you think about capacity as the ability to understand a problem, to synthesize a new answer, to really know what is the hardest problem to solve, capacity is an interesting thing because for many organizations, they erode capacity. The optimization to drive value in the short term actually removes your capacity to do something in the future. And so I would say that underpinning strategy has to be the ability to have valuable capacity to experiment, to try new things, because you don't know whether a thing you're going to do is going to work. And so you might need to try lots of different things, and that's what adaptation is to try different things and to find the thing that works and succeeds. if everyone's doing the same thing, then where's your competitive advantage? So that's a really important thing to me, and I think this emerging thing is, how do organizations have capacity to deal with a changing world when the prevailing circumstance economically is to reduce capacity?
Capacity. All right, I'm going to pin that one and see if we can come back to it, because we sort of touched on it on an earlier panel where we were talking about whether things should be centralized or decentralized and that kind of stuff. And it's not about whether it's correct to decentralize or centralize, but rather to what end, whether it's increasing your ability to, the efficiency with which you do some work or something like that. But let's pin capacity then. I think that's a good question for us to sort of keep revisiting throughout these questions. What do you think are in the latest trends of the past year? What's leading the charge in people's minds?
Well, I think there are some recurring trends. You just need to look around at this great exhibition to see all of the noise around AI, advanced analytics, all the cool, sexy stuff that executives hear about and put a lot of pressure on their organizations to deliver. And that's a lot harder than it appears, because oftentimes what's hidden below is a bit of a complex mess of data stored in all sorts of different places. At the same time, organizations are moving to the cloud, so there's a definite trend towards that, but there's just complexity. So taking advantage of these cool technologies is quite hard unless the fundamental foundations of data governance, knowing what data you've got, and I would say that because we're in the data catalog space, and that's what I experience,
Yep.
is whilst people want all these cool things, just finding data that they can rely upon and trust is really quite hard. So lots of exciting trends that drive demand, but I think we need to get the foundations in place so that you can trust the data that's being used by AI and advanced analytics.
So trust is a really key thing.
Yeah.
Trust is the foundation for speed, right?
Trust. Okay, so we have.
If you don't trust the data, you're kind of, well, can I do something with it? You're kind of wary. Do I trust you? Right? We're kind of wary about what we're going to say. So when you build trust, you build confidence that the outcome is actually what it's going to do when you ask it to use it for that purpose. So trust is the fundamental. Purpose of data is to make decisions, right? If you're not going to make a decision, then what's the point of the data? It's just a cost. So you've got to trust it. If you trust it, you can make better decisions faster. And if you trust the people to use the data effectively. So it's not just the data, it's the people interaction there. And I think a strategy that isn't embedded in trust is not a strategy.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. We visited a customer yesterday in Sweden, and one of the people there said, it's not just about the data, it's not just about finding the data. Most of their time, people are trying to find people who know about that data. Can I trust them? Can I therefore trust the data? So it's all the knowledge and the people associated with that data that's really important as well.
And that actually is about transparency.
Yeah.
It's about, as soon as you make things opaque and difficult, you're kind of, well, I don't really trust that. Where's it coming from? That's the value of lineage, right?
Yeah.
If I know the lineage, I know where data comes from, I can therefore go, well, who's the person I need to talk to?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Transparency is the foundations of trust, and trust is the foundation of all strategy.
And notice how it's never variable, that you don't just download data from one table and say this is good, and then you get the next table and it's rubbish. It usually is a source-based distinction of data from this source is good, data from this source, we'd have to look twice, don't even look at data from the third source, because it shows you that there's a connection to the process, to the systems, to the people underneath, that you can tell when there's manual intervention all over the place, when there's fat fingering of data, and it just drives back to, it's not the technology, it's not how much data you can crunch, it's are you putting systems and integrating a data culture in place that's technology completely agnostic. Data culture of let's follow the process, let's make sure we have, when I say system, I don't just mean technology, I mean a way of doing things, of when we need to enter this data, it has to be in an organized way. When we need to process this data, it has to be via an algorithm, not just somebody manually ticking off some options. So in the end, that translates into the trust that you're referring to of, in aggregate now, this data won't surprise me if all the processes have been followed, if all the system steps have been checked off almost like a list.
But let me ask then, you're saying that certain data's sources are trustworthy, and presumably that's because somebody's been managing that data source using a data structure approach, a data governance approach, and data access controls, all sorts of things. Maybe they have data lineage processes in place. And I guess my question is, when it comes to designing these systems, you could approach it like a waterfall approach where you have to have all that kind of stuff in place before you can even start using the data, or you can do the hack and slash Hadoop approach and get going. And when you start with that approach, I mean, there's many things that can happen, but at least for tech people, one of the main concerns is, what do you call it, like tech debt or something like that. And I'm going to add something to that dynamic, but is that, because we're, okay, so let me formulate this in the form of a question. We're being told in these conferences to work in an agile way, which seems sort of opposed to the idea of designing
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. What do you actually mean by agile?
I'm saying what's being said.
Okay.
Okay? And the sentiment of that, I think, means just go and ask questions later.
So
Sentiments.
there's a very good definition of agile, which we can come back to, but it'd be worth actually, people say we're going to become agile, we're going to become data-driven. These are not binary transitions. These are continual movements. You can become more agile. You become more decision-based, more data-based in what you do. And part of that is to say, where are we now, where are we going to? And that is part of that strategy. An organization says, we're going to be data-driven. Well, that is being data-driven. So how can you be data-driven if you're using data to be data-driven, right? There's deep irony there.
I think so. I guess the question is, a lot of organizations now are deploying data platforms, whether it's for processing data, governing data, all those kinds of things, and they're designing it for a long time before anybody uses it to make sure that the design is perfect. And that's orthogonal to...
What is the purpose of data?
The purpose of data? I would say it's to make decisions.
Okay, and what happens if you make decisions?
You generate more data.
Yeah, you're going to make change. You're going to have more data. You're going to have customers that are going to do something different. Your data structures are going to change. The patterns in the data are going to change. I build a predictive model that prevents churn. I now have new customers that are doing things in a different way. My model becomes invalid. I have to do something else with it. If data is used effectively, it changes the system it's within. And therefore, the models become, they decay to become invalid. So inherently, you have to design a volatile system and governance within that.
But does that mean then that technical debt is built into the system or an agile methodology?
So I said before about what is agile. I'm sorry if I've taken over here. Right, so agile, there are 6 attributes of an agile organization, 6. And it's fair. Flexible, adaptive, innovative, robust, resilient, and responsive. And that's not me making that up. There's been studies around that. So flexible, the ability to do different things. Adaptive, the ability to drive change and have change. Innovate, to bring new ideas, to bring different people together. Robust, having platforms or systems that can withstand pressure and change externally. Resilient, so that when it happens, they stand up. And responsive, which is the most important thing, because change is going to happen, it's recovery from failure. Because when things go wrong, how do you recover from that? And what that actually means is that every agent within a system needs to exhibit those attributes. And by agent, I mean people and software and tools and processes. The hardest thing, the number one thing that organizations need to do to be data-driven is to change their change processes.
Right.
Because if you want to be able to build a new predictive model, right? Let's say as a data scientist, and I've been a data scientist and led those teams, I build a predictive model, I need to make it go live. Well, the software development lifecycle doesn't support that, right? How is taking that model that's generated and pushing it into a test and a production environment actually going to make that model better? I only know whether that model has value if it changes a customer's behavior, and I can only test that in a production environment. And that is the inherent tension that exists between analytics and data scientists and people that want to operationalize and keep a platform running successfully. And that is the inherent problem with change. That if you want to use data more, you're actually going to drive more change, and so it's the change process itself that needs to change.
I think it's neat that you've pointed out that there's sort of several axes that you can measure the dynamics of an agile system. Already at the design phase, one thing I've been saying for many years is that engineers should be designing things to be destroyed from the get-go. So don't design a system that should be living for 5 years. Design a system that you could, in principle, rip and replace and rebuild and redesign with as little pain as possible, at least in principle. I mean, is tech debt something that is a legitimate concern now, more or less than it was in the past in data-driven strategies?
Absolutely. Tech debt it is the flip side of ambition. It is wanting to deliver something and knowing that you've got the incentive to deliver it quickly, and knowing that there are corners that could be cut today. And it's true, you can go to market faster, but that's the whole point of debt. It doesn't go away. You incur it, it keeps piling up. Something that could have taken you, an hour to fix when it's fresh now takes 2 hours because you have to, a week later, remember what it was. 2 weeks later, you've got another bug on top of that, so then it starts growing, like snowballing. But it's what Jonathan was alluding to earlier, that when you have an agile process, you need to resist those temptations of saying, like, we can just make a shortcut today and do it quickly. Whereas if you follow the process and say, we have these things, as soon as we do this, we know that there's going to be a new whatever ticket for fixing this thing that we glossed over, you actually make sure to revisit that. Otherwise, again, it's not going to sort itself out. It's only going to, you can kick it down the road, you can make it someone else's problem, but at the same time, I'm talking about it from a developer point of view. When you're dealing with the business, who are your stakeholders, they have a vested interest in performance. So they could care less about your tech debt. Imagine if we're calling documentation tech debt, your classic. Business doesn't care how much undocumented stuff you have that makes your job harder.
Yeah.
They need to get the product out to the public. And you need to balance those forces somehow. So Jonathan's smirking like he's got a solution.
There's so many things on that, but if you think the number one purpose of IT is to reduce risk, because that is the purpose of IT, is to reduce risk in the organization, because the more risk you have, the more money you have to set aside to mitigate against that risk. So if IT is introducing more risk by introducing debt, then it's actually not serving its purpose, which is a really interesting thing on there.
Well, I mean, there is a purpose to debt in economic systems.
Well, it gives you capacity, it gives you it's buying you capacity now to do something, to do now, that you're going to have to pay back later on. And the point about debt is there's an interest rate on that, right? You're going to incur interest rate at that. A lot of that actually comes around as the cost of not making that change. What's the cost of not doing
opportunity
something?
cost is one thing that's super hard to quantify, but if you have a debt that has a fixed interest rate, the question is, have you made an investment rate with a higher rate of return than the debt that you've incurred? And as long as you've done that, it doesn't matter how big your debt is.
So now you're
that's just an investment. That's just an investment mathematical truth.
But I do think, in a technology sense, the technical debt does hold back some enterprises. Where is the data? People can't find it. And all of the effort that goes into try and find it and try and identify the lineage and all of those things, it's a huge cost with a questionable return unless you can move it into a more modern environment where that world becomes a lot easier. But when you make that decision, that is a business decision as to, is it better that I move everything to the cloud with modern tools and new databases, new technologies, where the world is a brighter place, So you do need to make that economic and technical decision about when you move forward, because I do think it holds organizations back from a world of being more data-driven, because you've got more modern tools that everybody can use, and that's a foundation of building a data culture.
But then the developers have done a good job here, because the point is they have quantified what the technical debt will be. You know, they'll say something like, it will take us 6 months to redesign this if we do it the wrong way, and that'll cost you that much. And the business people have not done the homework in the beginning and say, it's providing this much value to us so that the cost, that covers the cost of rebuilding it later. They're saying, well, we think it might be valuable, we're not sure exactly how much, let's go ahead and see what happens. And then they're stuck with this big debt, and it turns out the thing they made was not as valuable as they imagined. Then they're in a bad spot.
So what you've articulated there is the foundations of the silos in the organization. The cultural silos, IT and the business. Right, immediately you've got this binary state, us and them, this combative thing. And actually all organizations like that, finance go, we're finance, they're the business. Marketing, we're marketing, they're the business. Sales, we're sales, they're the business. And so you end up, you know, we talk about data culture and cultural change, but actually starts with the language that we use in there. I think the word the business is incredibly toxic, because it drives those partitions, it drives those silos. Because, you know, how do I get paid? You know, as a developer, I get paid. I've got to pay my mortgage, I've got to look after my family. Where does that money come from? You know, I need to understand what is our business model, how it works, how I can do that. You know, if I can spot a way that makes that more efficient, then I am the business.
Yeah.
And so that relationship is fundamental to actually driving that better modern organization, is not by reinforcing legacy stereotypes of there's an outsourced IT department, there's this. It's about collaboration and true.
I guess it depends on where this stuff
organization.
is born, right? Because we were in a panel earlier, we were talking about how, well, I mean, one of the reasons to centralize things is to get the economy of scale benefits, right? If everybody's doing something, it makes sense to bring it to a central place and have somebody doing very efficiently for everybody. But now we're seeing that data science and a lot of other things are also being done centrally without being justified that way. Because, you know, maybe one team or two teams or three teams need it, but not everybody needs it. And so you have this ivory tower in the center, whereas the standard perhaps should have been to begin with that everybody needed to take ownership of their data and, you know, the outcomes of their AI models and that kind of stuff. And so now we're trying to push that out instead. So in the projects that you're involved in, the strategies that you see work and don't work, what are the commonalities when it comes to centralization and decentralization of those projects?
I think the number one commonality is, I mean, it's going to sound crazy in a modern conference, but everything old is new again, and it's getting the model right, as you just said, aligning to the business, making sure that you're speaking the same language from the get-go, that there's no ambiguity in the terminology, because these things will get turned into requirements and implementations, and before you know it, you've got tech debt or incorrect decisions.
Who determines if the model is right?
The business. It can only be the business. I know it's a toxic word, but I know that what you're referring to, it's a toxic division, but that division is very real, and it exists.
No, but if you just change that to say, it's the decisions were right, they were better decisions, that the outcomes were good, then that is business, right? Is making decisions and driving outcomes that serve the purpose of the organization.
Okay, but the classic question of what is a client? Who can define what a client is? Over to you.
I think developers are just not savvy enough as to the business model, what drives the business and all that. Not because they can't be, but they just traditionally haven't been. I mean, I think the nicest case is Zillow, you know, where they build this model for predicting house prices, and they do that, and then you have another business which has margins so that, you know, if you do one bad deal, you have to do 10 good deals to compensate for it, and that sort of aspect of the business is completely separate from the modeling, IT, and data science part, and so you end up with this product that doesn't deliver on the business objectives. The data scientists think they did a good job because they built a model that predicts house prices super, super well, and then the business people are not understanding why that model doesn't perform as expected. And that's because the data scientists aren't part of the business, I guess, or they see it as separate.
It was interesting. I was having a conversation with an organization this morning who during the pandemic realized that the regional differences were more extreme during the pandemic. So they've now, the business, has now decided to regionalize, and the technology, architecture, and strategy follows suit. So they're going more federated, more decentralized, following a data mesh principle, but it is driven by the business, the strategic imperatives of the business. Let's put it that way. Not the business, the strategy of the business.
And so they would be setting their own goals and everything as well, naturally, I suppose, because the regions...
Pushing the data...
Does that work,
out,
that federated approach?
Yes, I think so. Closer to where the business is actually happening, in the hands of the business to help them make decisions. It comes with some challenges because you can start losing some commonality and economies of scale, I believe, but the technology is better suited to support it.
So you asked a question earlier on about a catalyst. So I'm going to lean into that because in that situation, what you really want is to establish emerging best practice. And the role of a catalyst then is to float around the organization, to identify what people are doing, where things are failing, how to fix them, to identify good practices, centralize, synthesize those into things that are good best practices, and then share those. And that is really the role of the catalyst, that they can't be consumed by those interactions. Their job is to make the learnings, because people are doing those things in this federated way. They're doing learnings right at the edge. And it wouldn't be great if the people at the edge find ways of actually sharing those ideas with others.
Yeah.
But that's difficult because they're motivated to drive revenue locally. They're not motivated to optimize the whole. So that is the point of a catalyst team. And actually, when you talk about an ivory tower, you know, a center of excellence, that is fundamentally wrong, and you talk about a federated model. So having a deliberately constrained team, and I've done this, I've led those teams, of having...
What about people that counter by saying access control and management, like a bank? They'd be like, we just can't spread it out because there's too much security and governance stuff we need to manage.
Well, that burden of governance is a really important thing to attack. And the reality is that you need to adapt and change, right? Of understanding that situation of, well, bank, you know, those strategies are great, but then the pandemic comes along, right? And then these economic things happen. You've got, you know, well, there's the thing of, we're going to veto this thing because we've never done it this way because this has always works, and then suddenly you're in a changing world and you've got to change that. And it's about survival, right? If you can't adapt, you're not going to survive. And so a lot of the questions then is not saying why you shouldn't do those things, it's what happens if we don't? What's the implication of the business of not doing those things? So yes, federated controls and governance and data access need to be embedded in those distributed processes.
Even in banks and healthcare and everywhere else?
Even more so, right? Because it's about trust, right? If customers can't trust their data with the organization, they're not going to go there, right? And a lot of that is around bringing that responsibility into the people at the edge, right? And so the way that works is by having a microcosm of the business there. So I've also seen that where, for example, not just best practice from having data experts, but security experts. Look, if you've got a small federated team, it's got to have a security person there embedded there, so that as novel practices are being defined, they can go, oh, actually, that's a really good thing. We need to change that change process. We need to lock that in and share that. So now you've got the communication is really important. The standards communication in the federated model, even more so. And in fact, there's a responsibility in a federated model to communicate more than probably you do in a centralized model.
Right.
And if you don't, then you're actually creating technical debt.
For sure. I think this ties into what you were saying just a moment ago, where if it's not a person with knowledge of business metrics that can determine whether or not a data is meeting the requirements of a certain type of cleanliness or whatever the case may be, then who's going to be able to do it? Certainly not a centralized team, right? It has to, only the person that knows and produces and works with the data is best suited to be able to manage and handle that data, one would think. And so what I want to ask is, one thing that came up in an earlier panel, and I want to hear you guys' reflection on this. We've been talking in terms of data literacy for a couple of years, and I don't know if that term is watered out right now, but I get the sense when I was speaking to people here at the conference that people are feeling like we're headed toward a divide of the haves and the have-nots when it comes to their ability to express ideas in terms of what's possible with AI and data-drivenness. And like, where do you see the weaknesses in people's ability to express everything from technical requirements to project design requirements when it comes to being data-driven, whether that's AI or just more basic analytical stuff? Like, what kind of knowledge is required of these teams? What's missing the most in the projects that you're working in?
Exactly. That's, like they say, there's levels to this. And I think that's often overlooked in the mesh approach. And I'm not knocking mesh at all. Like, it's absolutely necessary for larger teams, larger organizations. But at the center of it, if we talk about this monolithic, what Data Mesh calls the monolithic data team, warehousing team, it's having the know-how of being able to put the right processes in place, the right controls, the right checks, the right model in place to make sure that, again, we're tying everything back to our business processes. And once you've empowered your teams to consume that data, which is actually what these modern data platforms excel in, is centralized governance, zero copy, cloning, sharing, the ability to tag on not just who's touching the data, who's consuming the data, but actually distribute the costs of consumption and processing down to the teams that use it, whereas before you bought a server and everybody, go ahead, have a field day. Tragedy of the commons. But now that it's distributed, we can actually see who's doing what. And this is the dirty little secret in data. You can't quantify it because you can't trademark it. You can't, a company can build a product, trademark it, sell it, get royalties off of it. You can't pay royalties on your own data. It's proprietary, it belongs to the company. But what you can do is say, okay, you're the marketing team. You come to me and you say that you've got a tremendous need for this, for my time as a data team. And here's the sales team making the same pitch, here's another team doing the same. Here's what I'm gonna do. I can build a robust model, and based on that, I can say that what you're asking for is already there. I can do some analyses and give you the answers you need and give you the answers you need, and it'll take me, X amount of hours, Y amount of hours. Do you have the budget? Is that, that's literally what it's worth in dollars and cents. Is that what it's worth to your business? And they can take that decision and say, actually, yes, we've got a lot of revenue riding on this, and that's a go for us. And the other team might say, it'll be faster for me to do this by hand and just approximate.
Sometimes it's fair to describe everything in terms of money, because at the end of the day, it's just a number on the amount of value you have. And talking about data mesh in terms of cost management is a pretty cool way to look at it, because it's very easy to forget sort of how do we justify spending more effort into this aspect of a project, and to be able to go back and figure out who's consuming the data, what value is it producing, and all, and really seeing at it from a cost management perspective, I think feels like a fairly sound way of thinking about it, actually. I mean, we do that with the cloud now, right? Just sort of, what department in the company is spending a lot of money on these resource groups, and so they have to be able to pay for their own resources in that way, and we should do that with data as well, or it seems to make sense that we should be doing that with data as our asset as well. It's cool that you brought that up as a something that you think maybe isn't in opposition to the data mesh, but at least is like an angle that people don't tend to think about. What other tired tropes are there when it comes to distributed data and modern data strategy out there?
I'd like to come back to your point on data literacy. I think we've come a long way. It wasn't that long ago, certainly in my lifetime, where data was the custodian of the data was the IT function.
Right.
They looked after the servers, they knew where it all was. If you wanted a report making, you'd probably go and speak to somebody in IT.
Yeah.
So
I don't think that was a trope. That's something that is a reality almost everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think what's happened is the tools have advanced to give people more ready self-serve access. We lived through a pandemic where the UK government every night was standing up saying, we're going to make data-driven decisions, and we're presenting graphs and charts freely and openly and transparently that were the basis of those data-driven decisions. You get data mentions on the front page of newspapers. There's an awareness and a greater literacy. I think people are becoming more educated. I think the tools have improved. People just need to be able to access it and find it and be able to trust the data for that literacy and culture to fully develop.
Right. What do you say about data literacy?
Well, I kind of think it's interesting that I think it's the wrong problem, right? I think that you need to focus on critical thinking of like, how do you know what is the right question to ask?
In that case, we're all screwed. You can't
Right?
teach that.
No, but you can, right? You can create an environment that encourages that encourages curiosity and challenge. And like, SQL was invented as a language to enable business people to interrogate the data, to be self-service. And it has failed, right? People can't use SQL anymore, and it's straightforward. It's select from table with some rules, right? How is that difficult? And yet now we've got to dumb that down into a report, and even that's too dumb, so I now have to ask some chatbot to tell me what the answer is, right? We're adding these layers of abstraction that actually make us less intelligent, not smarter. We have to go back to encouraging some people to apply critical thinking.
That has to be a key word here, though, because it's fairly clear to me.
Well, right, so I'm going to be, this is a trigger point for me. Right, this is a real trigger point. I'm sorry to go off on one. I believe in a data meritocracy, not a data democracy. That you've got to earn the right to have access to the most sensitive data to drive the most profound value, not enable everyone access to everything, because that just creates an insane burden of governance. If I gave you some plutonium, if everyone here had some plutonium or uranium, you wouldn't do that, right? You have to earn the right to work with toxic materials in the safe environment. You've got to earn the right to work with that data.
I'm going to go
That's a hot take. I love that. Go ahead.
And push back, because
Sorry.
if you're talking to, let's say, a senior director in a domain that they specialize in, let's say they're the marketing expert, I'm not. The best I could do is say, I can give you the data in the format that will be easy for you to, when you need to make a decision over millions of data points, I can summarize those for you in whether it's a report or whatever. I cannot teach you SQL and data modeling and notation and aggregation and performant query techniques. I can just trust that if I present this to you in a meaningful way, you'll know what to do with it. Whereas your data analyst, him I could work with in that capacity. Two different profiles looking at the same data. One has the tools to mess around with it. One just he knows what questions to ask. He probably knows the decisions to make based on the answer to those questions. There needs to be all three tool sets and skill sets working together.
I think business people are going to have a hard time, because we know for a fact that a lot of people struggle with reading two-dimensional charts. What does this chart tell you? And they'll say, well, the dots are in a line. It's so different from asking a technical person, what is the next most typical sample versus the most probable sample? And they'll know the difference between typicality and probability. And you can go to a business person and explain it, and it's not clear that they'll be able to understand what the difference is. Not everybody can run as fast as Usain Bolt, and not everybody can learn quantum physics. Maybe we're reaching an inflection point where you have to earn access to data, provided you've proven that you are able to interpret it. And so I don't think you're saying opposite things here.
No, absolutely not.
This business person, if maybe that's the only person that's qualified to be able to interpret the data, but maybe language models can provide access to that data in a way that doesn't require the person to learn how to program in SQL.
But if the language model, how do you know whether the language model is just making something up or giving you the right answer? And if you can't apply that criticality to the
I
thing,
only think that the language model is more auditable than a human. Because the data scientist is going to be doing the same thing, but you won't be able to audit that data scientist in the same way.
The data model, the language model is making something up because that's what it's designed to do.
Yeah.
But You know, I come from the tech side, and I get these questions from people who are less technical when they see articles, when they see headlines of, oh, look, here's the latest article that ChatGPT is generating code. Does that mean analytics is obsolete? And I know where they're coming from, because you can log on to ChatGPT, ask it a SQL question if all you really know is the word SQL and select, and say, how do I write a query? And it'll give you a query. But anyone who's ever used one of them knows that they're very imperfect. If you don't know what questions to ask, you won't get meaningful results. It'll look like magic when it spits something out, but it doesn't mean it's practical.
But there is something good to be said about these models that are outputting imperfect stuff. I'm pretty good at programming, and I think these models are tremendously useful for me. But the good news is that it's much easier to verify that that an answer is correct than it is to actually produce a correct answer.
Yes.
Right? You can verify that a program has output a reasonable answer more easily than you can actually write a program like that from scratch. And so perhaps even if the model is untrustworthy, a salesperson would be able to say, well, that looks unreasonable, or that looks reasonable, or something like that. And then we won't have to teach everybody how to use SQL or how to manage data and that kind of stuff. But then what is the onus of people when it comes to data literacy and data strategy? What is it we're actually aiming for if what we do is get rid of the technical burden and the technical debt and all that stuff? What's the I think we have 2 minutes here. If we summarize sort of what the vector of sort of data strategy here is, and it's not a technical one, what kind of an arrow is it?
I think it's where we started, which is, what is data for? To help people make better decisions.
Do better business? Or what does that mean?
Make better decisions in whatever business they're in. It could be education, it could be healthcare, it doesn't have to be...
Does it have to be measurable?
Well, what is better?
Yeah, well, I'm seeing if we can agree here.
That's the definition.
Does-
You've got to
do
be
we
able
have-
to measure it.
does
You're
everything-
applying that's that criticality, right? What does better mean? If you can't define better, then what's the point of making that decision?
Okay, so measurability, is that a central thing?
You can't improve it if you can't measure it.
What do you say? Measurability, how important is that?
I would say traceability, that anything you're making decisions on, you have to know that it's correct, and just know exactly the trade-off between time to market and doing it properly and auditing.
We can measure it in logits instead of some absolute value.
Yeah, I mean, you'll never have that just by the nature of the technology and large language models. They can't tell you why they produce the results they produce. Whereas you can go back to an analyst and say, you gave me these predictions and figures, where did this come from? And assuming they did it correctly, they can trace it all the way back and say, this is the data I used, these are the assumptions I made, these are the formulas I put in. And they might say, actually, that assumption was wrong, this formula is incorrect, this data is not trustworthy, go back and fix it. But do I need a quick judgment based on something? Sure, you can go to an LLM. They're immensely useful in many ways. I just don't think decision making is one of them.
All right. I think there is so much room for discussion on this topic. I recommend everybody watching online, if you want to keep discussing this over beers like presumably many of us will be doing, you got to be here in person. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for answering all these awesome questions in this panel today, everybody. I will be seeing you in the next event.